All right. It's now my pleasure to welcome Julia Roguski, who is the Associate Executive Director at Savio House, where she's worked in various capacities for the last 31 years. Ms. Roguski is passionate about helping children and families stay together and reducing the number of children who experience foster care. Over her career, she has helped develop 2 specialty courts in the state of Colorado and now serves as a faculty member for the National Association of Drug Court Professionals. And I think her talk is quite timely in the sense of how do we balance achieving permanency for our children in foster care while also recognizing the journey of parental substance use, and the risks as well as the hopes that many families on that journey may experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, wait, I have to figure out this. Okay, I got to get rid of that. All right. Well, thank you for having me here today. It's kind of a tough talk to follow. One of the things that I think is important for this group, I feel like we have probably a fairly decent group of woke individuals here that are attuned, sensitive, caring, but we work with people who probably don't have that level of attunement and wokeness, if that's a word that I can use. So I'm going to go through this. What we're going to talk about today is really sort of a foundation that we typically think about in the child welfare world in terms of safety and that threshold there, and how that relates to the work that we do today. So hopefully it will be a good time. Okay, we're going to jump in because we're going to try to get through a lot in a short period of time. So again, I think you all are fairly attuned and woke, but I want you to think about the things that you think about when you're working with a substance involved person. And maybe you think about, maybe you are pretty woke and attuned. Maybe you think about the people you struggle with. Who are the folks that are hard to bring along on this journey? And what are the words that they use to describe someone who has a substance use disorder? So just, you don't have to actually write it down. There's no homework, thank you. But think about what are those things? What are the stigmas that come along? And how often does it describe the person's behavior or their worth or identity, right? That we're struggling against some fairly deeply rooted biases around folks who suffer from a substance use disorder. Which words reflect stigma or moral judgment versus safety? And what language can we use that doesn't honor really the humanity of the person that's standing in front of us? And again, I feel like this is a great group. And I was here and listened to those nurses from Larimer, or the social workers from Larimer. Holy cow, wish they were everywhere. What energy and positive work they're doing. So you all understand this. We all come from our own set of biases, and that impacts how we treat people. And again, I feel like someone was asking some questions about how do you bring everybody else along? And that's a really hard task. It really is difficult to think about, especially when biases are fairly rooted in our experiences in life. I think it's good to have some awareness of this. And also understand that when we're dealing with someone else, maybe another colleague who really struggles here, they probably have their own history of coming from a world with substance use disorder. But when I think about substance use disorder and parents that we interface with, I really see them as the parents we see are the kids we missed. I really do believe that in my heart, that the folks that we're seeing now are the generation we didn't get a touch, and therefore it has repeated. And if you see a parent as someone who is just a child who has suffered from lots of different things and probably intergenerational substance use, you look at them really differently than you would if you think something more negative or more judgmental about them. So this is a place where I tend to stand, that if I look at a parent who's really struggling and I see them as a child that we missed, I'm going to treat them really differently than I would if I had another sort of paradigm from which to look at that. So as you all know, I'm not sharing anything here that's groundbreaking, but substance use disorder is a chronic relapsing disease. It is a disease of the brain, and it is chronic and relapsing. We do not shame people for having a chronic relapsing disease like diabetes. We do shame people around substance use disorder. But again, I think that we've come really far in this area. I've been working in this field for over 30 years, and 30 whatever years ago, it was a buck it up and grit through it. And now we understand it really as a brain disorder. It's a brain disease. The way people think about the world, see the world, is really different. And relapse is common. And it's not because of moral failure or lack of willpower or not loving their children enough. It really is a non-linear disease, similar to diabetes is probably one of the most chronic relapsing diseases that is managed. We see similar things here, but everybody feels really empowered to judge folks when it really is their brain is working differently, and the cravings, the seeking behaviors, those are things that are hard to overcome. And you could have a trigger that hits you that takes you all the way back after years of sobriety. Let me give you an example. Anybody hear a song from high school and know every word? Right? And did you go right back to the car with your friends? Right? It just takes you back. So there are triggers that happen, and that's a benign or even, dare I say, a friendly memory. But those things happen. You don't know what's going to trigger you and what happens for folks. And it's not linear. And just because someone has a relapse doesn't mean they don't get credit for all the efforts that they've made thus far, right? So as we understand, it's a brain disease. It impacts our reward system. There are neurobiological changes, and it really makes it difficult for folks to simply just obviously choose to stop. So what do we do? How do we ensure, knowing this and with the respect to the work that you all are doing with infants, newborns, prenatal, how do we manage that with this tiny little human being that we have to somehow try to keep safe? So this is the standard for child welfare, okay? First of all, determining safety, it is not an equal between substance use means unsafe. Similarly, it doesn't equal if you have non-detected use, it doesn't mean they're safe. And I'm being intentional about my language here because folks rely heavily on urinalysis screens or other types of screening to determine use. But that is a point in time, and there are detection levels that it doesn't give you information about sobriety. It just tells you whether or not during that time you don't have a detectable substance. Okay, so we tend to like to hang our hat on P. We love it, especially in the child welfare system and the juvenile justice system. We put a lot of emphasis on this. But there are people who are sober that shouldn't be within 100 miles of a child. And then there are folks who are using that can still be a safe caregiver with a good safety plan, plan of care. So those are things that it just doesn't equal. Danger, and these are all child welfare concepts. So if you get your partners who are part of child welfare involved, these are the things that they have to think through. Danger has to be present. You have to be able to see it. It's not like a maybe or this could happen. That's risk. Safety has to do with something that's present now. And even if you have danger, you can have protective capacity. So again, a lot of the things that you all are thinking about and doing, it's like, okay, let's align with reality. How does it look here? What's happening in this family? And how are we going to manage it? How do we mitigate those dangers? And how do we ensure safety of children? So these are just, I feel like you're a very attuned audience. So we understand that there are myths, right? That more willpower, of course not. That if they love their children more, that's one that is just really awful because as we heard just a few minutes ago, parents suffer deeply when their substance use disorder is out of control and they don't feel safe saying out loud that things aren't safe or that it's out of control or I need help. People just don't feel safe saying that because there is so much judgment, and then you're going to open up a world of hurt potentially. So creating some safe spaces where parents feel comfortable, and really socially for women, it's kind of the worst thing that could happen to you to not be able to parent your child. Right? Like in our society, being a woman and losing your child is like awful, socially and otherwise. Men, it's not as big of a deal, mostly in our culture, if men aren't around children. But if you lose your ability to be around your child as a woman, that's a tremendous loss with so much shame around that. So just some attunement to that too. So thinking about building protective capacity, the idea is, and again, this is nicely timed after those lovely yoga doing social workers from up north. We're talking about plans of safe care because building protective capacity really talks about how do we align with reality and support people in the ways that is meaningful for them. Right? Where are the places where you need help? How do you need that? So it includes things like feeling like you have emotional regulation, healthy coping, access to stable supports, engagement in treatment. So sobriety is always the goal, and I would never stand in front of someone who suffers from a substance use disorder and give them permission to use. But I also need to align with that happens sometimes, right? And so what do we do? So the goal here is to create a system that's sustainable and supportive. Here's the other thing that we know about folks who suffer from a substance use disorder. They often are fairly disenfranchised from their people, right? They burned a couple bridges here and there. We heard that in the story that was just shared with us, right? That you burned some bridges. You promised that you were going to get it together and it didn't happen because you didn't have the right supports. So how do we make sure that they are either repairing those relationships, finding some support that's reasonable and helpful? And when it comes to kids, who's parenting if you're not able to? And it all really depends on developmental needs of children. But I think anyone who's a parent in this room has probably sent their children to grandma's house when you maybe had a gathering at your home, right? When my kids were little, my husband was a commercial airline pilot, and there were certain medications that I couldn't take when I was at home alone with two small children because it knocked me out and I wasn't available. So again, just knowing those things, finding people that can fill the gaps and aligning with some reality with folks is helpful. Long-term recovery, it's not a destination. It's not just a one thing that gets you there, or I've achieved it and I've made it. It really has to do with holistic recovery, addressing the underlying mental health issues. Now, most of our substance use disorder specialists in the state of Colorado are duly certified as mental health professionals as well, because you really can't tease those two things apart, right? It's not just substance use disorder. They're often, and look, it's trauma, it's sexual assault, it's child abuse and neglect, it's those things. Substance use disorder are intergenerational and have been repeating for a long time. And so if you can finally help address folks and get their substance, get treatment, especially mental health treatment, and I'm glad to hear that you can't just go to substance use disorder treatment. You also have to sort of figure out what are the underlying things that have happened. And I'm just going to make another comment about the needs of women. The needs of women and men are often very different, but often women don't identify that what has happened to them is actually abusive or dangerous or sexual assault, interpartner violence. A lot of women don't even identify that as a thing. So as they get sober and go through treatment, we can help start treating what I would describe as complex PTSD, really addressing those underlying issues to give them support so that they no longer are using to mask those symptoms. And then life skills. One of the best things that we can do for the folks that we work with is give them the basic life skills, support around employment, support around financial literacy and stability. And really, like, if they knew how to do it, they probably would. So even parenting skills. So the early childhood interventions like safe care, which is just really a skill-based parenting intervention. It's all about this is what you do when this happens. It's providing that understanding to give them the skills. And resiliency is really built out of having a capacity to function in the face of adversity. What does that mean? So I'm gonna make a general assumption about this group. And I know some of you in here, and I'm still gonna make the assumption, just kidding, that we're all fairly well-resourced humans that have a depth of a bench to support you when there's a problem. So the person that you call when you have a flat tire might be the different person than who you would call if you have an argument with your partner or your kids, right? You got a bit of a bench. You know who to call. That's what develops resiliency, is having folks that you know you can count on in times of need. Just to throw back for a second, often folks with substance use disorder don't have a good bench. Their bench does what? Gets them drugs, right? Gets them out of doing the things that they should be doing, right? Or brings them back into a substance use. So we got to help them. What the AA comment is, the only thing you need to change is everything. What would happen if you can't call the people you've been leaning on for years? So it's important that we think about developing those aspects of resiliency. And I'm going to skip through a couple of things because we don't have time for it. Sorry. Okay. I will just make a comment that there's Harvard has the Center for the Developing Child, and it has phenomenal resources on there. It's just a really cool resource that talks a lot about early childhood and early childhood interventions. I don't think we have time for some of the things I was going to show, so we'll just keep on keeping on. Parenting skills, family dynamics, providing tools to handle stress, that's another thing, right? Like when someone is in recovery, okay, throughout the day, your tolerance for irritations or life probably goes like this throughout the day. Let's assume this is normal range, like everybody seems pretty good right now. Something happened that irritates you, you read an irritating email, you look at your phone, you might get a little irritated, but you can re-regulate, right? Folks with a substance use disorder, their nervous system is out of whack. They make huge peaks and valleys in terms of how they're feeling, their reaction. I use the terminology of they're sunburned, right? So if anybody's had a sunburn, I'll assume some of you have. I don't have a sunburn right now. You can touch me, I'm fine. If I have a sunburn and you touch me, I might flinch and it hurts. That our families are in this space, someone who's suffering from a substance use disorder really struggles with regulation. And so how do we support them? How do we provide tools for handling stress? Really the trauma-informed care, people say those words and I always like to ask, what does that mean to you? How are you doing that? How are you being trauma-informed? Because seriously, literally everybody's doing it. But we probably can guess a lot of people are missing the mark a little bit. Getting that support back in their network and support system, and not just, well, I'll call my sister. Because what if I call my sister and she either doesn't pick up or she's wasted or she won't help me because she's mad about what's happened? So how do we help repair? How do we provide supports around folks to help regain that social connection in a more positive and supportive way? And there's a piece of shame to that if every time you promised that you were going to get clean or not use again, you meant it and it still didn't work. And here you are again for the umpteenth time, vowing that this time is different. How do you get your people to get on board with that and support you through the not so straight line process that they're going to have to go through? It's complicated and it requires support, grace, willingness, honoring. I always use the example of, I'm sure at least one of you's been on a diet once before, at least one of you could relate to that. What do you need when you fall off your diet? What kind of support do you need? Do you need someone to be like, well, you're going to get fat again, right? You don't need that. What you need is someone to say, what do you need right now to help you feel more supported? Permanency planning is a concept that is a child welfare legal concept. And what that means is who's going to parent this kid long term, right? And how I read that is, what is the definition of this child? We are defining who this child is going to be, and determining permanency is a legal big deal. We can create permanency that doesn't depend on sobriety alone. That we can acknowledge that folks who suffer from a substance use disorder may not have the straightest line from here till the kids graduate from high school, right? That's a long time. I'm a parent of 2 high school kids, and I'll tell you what, every now and then they make me want to maybe use substances. But how do we think about that, and how do we align with reality, and how do we support folks to make good decisions? It's that connection between a parent's behavior and how that impacts their children. And you can support parents in making that connection without driving shame, right? That you can do that without saying you have to have someone else to support you in case you use again. It's more like, okay, because it's not just about substances. It could be about a friend that, a new friend that you meet or a new boyfriend that you meet. You have to think about who's going to be safe around your kids and really supporting folks to make those connections. So making sure that we're embracing compassionate and comprehensive approach. So substance use disorder is a chronic, manageable disease, but it requires compassionate care. And I feel like all of you wonderful people here are on board with this. It's how do we bring everybody else with us? So how do we make sure that we're having those conversations, both about achieving that long-term and what sustainable recovery looks like? I'm just going to cruise through a couple of scenarios. We're not doing anything fancy here because we got to pay attention to time. But here we go. These are things that I use in training with child welfare professionals. We have a mom who's drinking alcohol and she passes out for 10 to 12 hours a night, and her child is 14. Not the greatest scenario, but probably as long as this child's developmentally on target, there isn't a safety issue here, right? There are things that we can do to dial in and support this family and this youth, but it is not a safety issue as long as this kiddo is developmentally on target, okay? Let's change this to a 2-month-old. And now we have a mom who's passing out and she has a 2-month-old. We need to make sure that when this happens, there is a safe, sober, capable caregiver who can meet the developmental needs of this 2-year-old or 2-month-old, which is what? Regular feedings, diaper changes, safe sleeping positions, proper nutrition, all of those things, right? So these are the things that child welfare has to think through as part of their decision making. But this demonstrates that there's a threshold there, right? So the 14-year-old, not ideal. A lot of people grow up in a situation like that, and it's not our responsibility to intervene. We have like that Constitution thing and stuff, right? That we're not allowed to just intervene. We hit a 2-month-old, and now we have immediate danger if we don't know if there's an adult who is willing to do the things that's necessary for this 2-month-old. So those are the decision trees that child welfare goes through. All right. Protective capacity, when we're asking for this and when we're thinking about plans of safe care, and I see this happen in child welfare a lot in my career, is that we would put a safety plan together and we'd be like, okay, grandma's moving in. I feel good about this. But do we know what grandma's going to do? Is grandma capable? Is she going to sit on the couch all day? Is she drunk all day? What is her responsibility and what are the things that we're asking of other people that are specific around the needs of the children? So really putting people in charge of what we need them to do is critical, and ensuring that people understand, like, you don't just move someone in with a 2-month-old. You got to have a conversation about, hey, have you ever taken care of a 2-month-old? Do you know what they need? What are the things that need to happen? So again, helping folks create protective capacity. And through those conversations, we're helping parents make the connection between my behaviors are impacting my child, and I need to think those things through and make sure my kiddo, my child, has someone that can meet their needs if I'm not able to, and that I can do that and understand what those are. So really it's about behavioral, observable actions, having the ability to recognize threats. That is something that comes with time and sort of thinking about the women who may not even understand or recognize the violence that they've lived through is violence. They might not identify that. And so they may not be able to identify that for their children. So how do we help them understand that those things are not okay? And then they can be more protective as an adult. A lot of people don't understand danger and even just interpartner violence. I had a friend that did a study, this has been years ago now, at the jail, the women's jail, right over here on Smith Road. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it is. Okay. And she asked how many women who were incarcerated had experienced sexual assault, had experienced domestic violence, had experienced child abuse or neglect. And she got about a 70% return rate of yes. And then she asked the questions differently. Has someone ever forced you to have sex? Has someone ever, that you were in a loving relationship, hit you? Were you ever in foster care as a child? And guess what happened? She had about a 95% rate saying that happened to me. What does that say to us? Women don't identify that what happened to them was danger or not okay and abusive. So again, these are ways that we can ask questions and also just have an awareness. And I feel a little heavily weighted towards women, so I'm going to make a comment towards men that we work with. Men express trauma really differently and often violently. So when I see a very violent man, I see that as someone who also has probably experienced lots of trauma. And sometimes just the process of becoming a male in certain cultures can be quite abusive and violent. So we're really good with identifying in women, but I feel like it's worth making the comment about men too. Okay, so protective factors are about nurturing and attachment, resilience for the parents, social connections, concrete supports. I don't need like psychological supports. Actually, I need those too. But like concrete supports. If you have to work or you need care for your kids, who's going to help you watch your kids? Are you in some sort of co-op with some friends where I watch your kids when you need it, you watch my kids? Those are concrete supports that are quite helpful. Understanding parenting and child development. Look, kids don't come with a manual and folks don't know what to do. I was a well-resourced, what was it called? AMA, advanced maternal age. I couldn't remember what it was. Advanced maternal age. And I thought, what the hell are you people doing letting me leave this hospital with this thing? And I was well-resourced and thought I knew what I was doing. So anyway, knowledge, information is power. And then helping them, how do they connect and create some social and emotional competence for kids? And here's another thing we're not going to watch. Sorry. How do we do this? It's really to promote balancing the concepts around safety and well-being, looking at prevention and intervention tools, and how do we put our arms around families and create a community that is supportive. That's hard to do. Things like the work that's happening here is amazing. And how do we get folks connected into the right parts in our community where people who understand and are supportive, that's really where we're going to build the most protective capacity. Listen, just to wrap up here, appreciating time. It's not easy. It's actually exhausting. If you're working in a medical community where there are a lot of people that aren't drinking this kind of Kool-Aid and they feel strongly and have a more powerful voice and maybe a more powerful position, it's really difficult work. So I just hats off to all of you for being here today, and for wanting to make some important changes in our community. I just want to say again, I believe in my heart, the parents we see are the kids we missed. And so one more thing on taking care of yourselves. This is wonderful. This is about building your professional resilience. It's not about self-care, because I don't even know what that means, but this is an excellent tool to help us be better helpers and build that professional resilience. What I love about this is that it's not about not being impacted by the work. It's about knowing what to do when you are. And so I would just encourage everyone to make sure you put your mask on first and care for yourself. This is a wonderful, easy to implement resource for the caregivers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are not going to have time for questions, but if you do have any, please approach Julia in person. Given that we are running a little late, let's just pause for a 5-minute break and we'll come back for our keynote as well as a resource presentation.